What if I told you that in today's equestrian world, your entire career could disappear overnight? Not after a trial, not after a verdict, but after an allegation. What if everything you built over decades, your reputation, your livelihood, your identity could be paused instantly before you ever had the chance to fully defend yourself? And what if I told you that that system capable of doing that is also a system we genuinely believe in? Because that is where this story becomes uncomfortable. We think safe sport is a good thing. We think safe sport is necessary. But what happens when a system designed to protect athletes also raises difficult questions about fairness, process, and time? There are moments in sport when something shifts so deeply that it forces everyone involved to stop and reconsider what they thought they understood. Not because the answers are obvious, but because they are not. Because sometimes the hardest stories are not about choosing sides. They are about sitting in uncertainty and realizing that two opposing ideas can both feel true at the same time. And right now, that uncertainty is running straight through equestrian sport. For decades, Frank Madden was not simply part of the system, he was woven into it. He was a name people recognized, a trainer whose presence felt constant, and a figure whose influence extended across generations. Riders built their careers under his guidance. Families placed their trust in him. And his role in the hunter and equitation world became so established that it almost felt permanent. Which is why what happened next felt so jarring. In December of 2025, Frank Madden's name appeared in the U.S. Center for SafeSport's Centralized Disciplinary database, tied to allegations of sexual misconduct. According to reporting, those allegations date back nearly 40 years. They include claims of inappropriate sexual content involving minors in the 1980s, with alleged incidences occurring in places like Florida, Virginia, and even Switzerland. One report references an allegation from 1984, while others point to alleged incidences from 1987. These are serious accusations. They are not vague and they are not minor. But they are also decades old. So old that they fall outside the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution. And that detail can change everything, because it introduces a question that does not have a clear answer. Should there be a statute of limitations when it comes to allegations like this? On one hand, it feels deeply uncomfortable to say that time should erase accountability, because we know that victims often do not come forward right away. We know that fear, power dynamics, and culture can delay reporting for years, even decades. And if that is true, then placing strict time limits on accountability can feel like another way the system fails them. But on the other hand, it is equally uncomfortable to consider what it means to investigate and act on allegations that are 40 years old. Memories fade, evidence disappears, witnesses are no longer available. And the ability to fully and fairly examine what happened becomes increasingly difficult. And yet, despite all of that complexity, the consequences for Madden were immediate. Within a short period of time, he was placed under temporary suspension. He could no longer coach. He could no longer compete. He could no longer participate in the sport that he had defined his life in. His career did not slowly decline, it stopped. And this is where the emotional weight of his story begins to settle in. Because we understand why safe sport exists. We support why safe sport exists. We believe safe sport is a good thing. It was created because athletes were not protected, because abuse was ignored, because people in positions of power were allowed to operate without accountability, and that cannot happen again. But supporting safe sport does not mean we stop asking questions. And in fact, it means we should ask better ones. Because in March of 2026, Frank Madden filed a federal lawsuit against the U.S. Center for SafeSport. And in doing so, he turned this into something much bigger than one case. He challenged the system itself. His lawsuit argues that SafeSport is operating with powers that resemble those of a government authority, while not being held to the same constitutional standards. It claims that the organization investigated decades-old allegations, suspended him, and publicly listed his name before he had what his legal team describes as a meaningful opportunity to defend itself. And this is where the tension becomes impossible to ignore, because this is not just about whether the allegations are true. It is about what happens before that question is fully answered. SafeSport is not a criminal court. It does not require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It does not rely on juries. And it is not limited by statutes of limitations in the same way that traditional legal systems are. That is intentional. Because many cases of abuse cannot be proven in court. Because waiting for certainty can mean allowing harm to continue. Because traditional systems have failed. But when you remove those safeguards, something has to replace them. And that is where the line becomes unclear. Because now we are left asking difficult questions. What level of evidence is enough? What level of certainty is required? And who decides when action should be taken? Madden's lawsuit argues that the system acted first and allowed him to respond later. It argues that consequences were imposed before the process was complete. And it argues that the damage to his reputation may already be irreversible, regardless of how the case ultimately ends. And whether you agree with those claims or not, they raise a question that affects everyone in the sport. Because this system does not just apply to one trainer, it applies to all of us. It applies to trainers, to riders, to grooms, to officials, to anyone who exists within the structure of organized sport. And that is what makes this case so uncomfortable, because it forces people to ask a question they may not want to consider. Would the system treat me fairly? Within the equestrian world, the reaction has been deeply divided. Some people believe this lawsuit is necessary. They believe it is a moment where SafeSport itself must be examined, questioned, and held accountable. They worry that the system has become too powerful, too opaque, and too difficult to challenge. Others believe the opposite. They believe SafeSport must remain strong. They worry that questioning it too aggressively could discourage victims from coming forward. They fear that weakening it could take the sport backward. And both sides are right to feel the way they do, because this is the truth at the center of all of this. A system with too little power fails victims, but a system with too much power risks becoming something else entirely. And right now, equestrian sport is trying to figure out where that balance should be. This is not just about Frank Madden. It is about how we define fairness. It is about how we define accountability. And it is about whether we can hold two uncomfortable truths at the same time. That SafeSport is necessary, and that SafeSport is not above scrutiny. As this case moves forward, it will take time. There will be legal arguments, filings, and decisions that may ultimately shape how SafeSport operates in the future. It may strengthen the system, it may change it, or it may reveal challenges that the sport has not fully addressed. But even now, something has already changed. The conversation is no longer quiet. The system is no longer invisible. And the sport can no longer avoid the questions it has been putting off. Because once trust is questioned, it does not quietly return. So now I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. Do you believe SafeSport is getting this balance right? Or do you think something needs to change? And how do you feel about the idea of a statute of limitations in cases like this? Because this case is not just about one trainer. It is about the future of fairness, accountability, and trust in this sport, and where we draw the line.